Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Anthony McCauley, Director of Philosophy at Western State Colorado University. Tonight, we are featuring our second philosophy intersections of the spring semester, Waiting for Godot, What Beckett Really Didn't Want You to Know, presented by Scott Little, our Technical Director of Theater, and the cast and crew of P Productions' Waiting for Godot. This is one of my favorite types of intersections because it's one that features a panel of both instructors and students. Tonight's intersections will give us a background into the effort that goes into a theater production, especially one whose material is as challenging as Waiting for Godot. So thank you, and I'll let Scott introduce you to the cast and crew. Thank you.
As he said, I'm Scott Little. I'm the Technical Director of Theater, and this here is Brian Cole, who played Lucky. Why don't we just kind of chain on each other?
Should we tell a fun fact ourselves? Can we?
If you want to.
I might not to.
But then Bella won't have anything to say.
Bella's
Every time.
Fun fact.
Okay, introduce her.
Oh, this is Lily. She played Vladimir. She's really cool.
That's a good fun fact. All right, well, now that we started this trend, this is Bella Lewis. She played Estradon, or Go-Go, and fun fact about Bella is that I think that she could sleep on an active volcano and not wake up. So, there we go.
Gosh, I'm so lame. My
Such
ability
dumb
is sleeping.
Mine's being cool, it's okay.
This is John Gossman. He played the boy. And a fun fact about him is he is really awesome at guitar and he taught himself.
This is Brittany Pearson. She played Patso. And a fun fact about Brittany is that she's always lively even when she acts mean.
This is Brian Kramer. He was our wonderful sound designer. Fun fact about Brian, he is really good at the game pit. Kicks my butt every time. It's very frustrating.
This is Emma. She was our stage manager.
That's good. Fun fact, she's amazing at the saxophone.
This is Kayla. She is our costume designer. And fun fact, you make amazing waffles. And I guess we're gonna. Should I
Do you want to pass us? We have a few other people here in the front row.
Yeah,
Here is Pat. He was our lighting designer. And I don't know.
This is Josiah. He was the assistant stage manager.
Just you have to say something cool about Brian since you didn't get anything.
Yeah, you did it.
This is Scott Little, the
Who
director.
thinks Brian is pretty cool?
And he thinks Brian is pretty cool.
Okay.
Okay. And thank you all for coming. I might say, like Beckett said, that I really do not know what any of this means, but because he was very famous for trying to dodge the answers to questions about his plays. How many of you saw the play? Okay.
Here or ever?
Here or ever. Okay. So what you might see back here, they're just talking points. I'm not trying to lecture or anything like that. I don't want you to get that idea. Since kind of the theme of these intersections is progression, I think one of the things that a lot of the information that we might talk about are things that we found out as we went through the process of developing the production that we had. First and foremost, if you didn't see the play here, we had female cast members, which very rarely happens, because Beckett was very much against it, and his state still stipulates that there aren't changes allowed in his shows to this extent. We kind of snuck around that. But I think one of the things that we want to talk about is the progression of how things. This play was originally produced in 1953, and how have things changed since then? And by doing female cast members, have we changed it in some inalterable way? I personally think the play is a very universal play, meaning that it seems to speak to all times and all places, and has a lot to say, not just about when it was originally produced, originally written, but down through the ages as it's produced, it still has a lot of merit and says a lot of things I think that are important. So some of the things that I think we might want to talk about are some of the things that Beckett wouldn't have wanted to talk about. Okay.
Everyone over 40 laughed. That's the third line.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. We had some talkbacks for the show, and on our second talkback, one of the first questions was, why was Beckett such a sexist? I wouldn't necessarily say that Beckett was overtly a sexist. Just given his time and place, maybe there was ignorance, shall we say. And he would never have thought of the play in the terms of having female cast members. So there is that. One of his famous quotes was, "Women don't have prostates." And if you've seen the play, you know there's a lot to do with urination issues, shall we say. And maybe it's a little easier to talk about those issues when you have men in the roles, or maybe it's not with women, I don't know. But I guess one of my questions to those of you who have seen the play, do you think that that was handled well? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
I went on the second night, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, the second night. And it's been reiterated to me that was the best performance you guys did out of all the nights. And honestly, like, I thought you played the prostate problem very well into the play. It was, sorry. You fit it in such a way that it still made sense and it was still funny.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay. Some things that came about as we kind of explored the show with women in the roles. Some of the women's issues given the female cast. Okay. Issues that I'm sure would never have thought of, that Beckett would have thought of to begin with. But I think they're issues that I felt that we explored in a halfway decent manner. And I think Lily and Bella could probably speak to some of those, perhaps.
Well, I think that, I never went into it, and I didn't want to. I will fully admit it, I am the reason that we use pronouns she instead of he in this show, because I did not want to be a woman playing a man. I didn't think I could give as authentic a performance doing it. So I didn't really approach all the women's issues kind of came naturally after that, because you're just like, well, if I think about this line in the context of maybe I'm fat, or maybe I'm fatter than you, then it's an automatic everyday occurrence for a lot of women, so it's not as, you compare butts all the time. We just did it in men's pants. So,
I was looking forward to playing dudes. I was really hoping that would happen. I like the lines about erections that we had to cut out, obviously. But I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it would be interesting, and at first I was like, oh, we're playing girls, all right. But I got into it more, and I realized that it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's such a flexible play on all aspects, with plot, with character. And whether you have females or males, it didn't really matter. And it wasn't really hard for me to get into Estragon's character because, like I said, it really depends on how you make it. Because there's no, total character descriptions of this is what you should be and this is what you should be. So, bowler hats. That's all that we had to do. And I thought it was great, and I didn't have any problem with the gender roles or the prostate thing.
yeah, going back to the prostate thing, I was just thinking, we can get urinary tract infections, we can get all kinds of nasty things, so not having prostates would exclude us from pain.
That's what really matters. What about you, Brittany?
Yeah.
of the things that kind of struck me that was kind of interesting because I was a woman and my wonderful person that carried my bags was male, it brought up a weird power struggle that normally wouldn't really be there because I am a lot smaller in stature than Brian is, and he is male versus me being female, even though, you know, it's not like we would ever like physically duke it out or anything like that. But it brings up a whole other dynamic to it because when it's two men playing it, it's not as big a deal. Normally they, like in a lot of the productions and stuff that I've seen, the person playing Pato is always a really big guy and the guy playing Lucky's always really small. And in this instance, it was slightly reversed. And so it brings forth this whole other dynamic of it because it's a woman controlling a man, which is weird. And he has his own ways of messing that up, like when he freaks out and I have to take away his hat and destroy his thinking and that kind of thing. And one of the other things that got brought up a little bit more as we started progressing through the play was the fact that Godot was a man. And a lot of the time, like when Estragon and Vladimir are talking about like, well, we can't leave because he'll punish us and all this kind of stuff, it reverses kind of Lucky and I's role because then Godot is the one with all the power over the female characters. And that's kind of, it's a different aspect because the sexes are different, even though the power struggle when it's an all-male cast is still there. It kind of amplifies it a little bit because there is that gender, like the gender change. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it gave us a lot more things to be interesting about in a way. So, there's also a question, even in the all-male versions, about equality, sexual identity, gender, those kinds of things, which kind of took on a different level of interest as we applied women's roles to these things. But you know, one of the big questions throughout the years are, you know, are Dee and Godot, are they gay, are they in love, or what's going on with those kinds of things, you know. Which is something I think that we definitely explored, and regardless of whether it was males in those roles or females in those roles, I think that is something there that is in the show. I don't know if it's something that Beckett necessarily would have wanted to spend a lot of time discussing or thinking about. Of course, it's hard to know what he thought, but there's that. Theater of the absurd in general is kind of an answer to, or kind of trying to explain what happened in Europe after World War II, well, World War I and World War II, and about kind of the meaninglessness of life and all of those different kinds of things. And still applies to the play, I think, very much. Now, how does it apply today versus 1950? You know, how has the world changed? I think those questions are important, and I think they come up a lot. And I think using art to explore these things is something that I think Beckett would have wanted, you know, and that's the whole point of this play, is to explore those kinds of questions through the use of art. And the last question I have down here on this slide is art enough? Okay, and we talked a lot about, and it came up in our talkbacks about Pato and Lucky and about the character of Lucky and who he was and who he has become and why he is the way he is and why Pato treats him that way. And I think that has a lot to do, in my opinion, and maybe Brian can chime in on this, on sometime in the past, Lucky was a lot more of an artist and kind of representative of that end of things, an artist and a thinker and those kinds of things. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
I played Lucky. Well, when we were going through his background, there were a lot of hints to him being a lot more intelligent than he was at that time of the show. And so I was thinking that just as it went along, his head kind of got muddled, and he kind of got lost in his head. And like if you let him loose, he was hard to control. And Ange talked to me about this. She thought it was Lucky represented creativity, and once you let it loose, it just like goes ballistic. And to control it, and it's like really scary. Everyone's really afraid of it. So to control it, you just have to shut it off totally. And some people like beat it into submission. That's all.
Okay.
Well, it's said that like Vladimir has a line like, saying that she knows Lucky and Pazzo, and that they've changed, that they've been different. So maybe the last time she met Pazzo and Lucky was able to talk on his own and did plenty of different things and seemed a lot more intelligent. So there's that huge background of how many times have they done this and how has he regressed over time.
John?
Yeah, just on Lucky, I caught the last show, and I thought you played it really well. Compared to other times I've seen, it was my favorite. And what I really liked about it was when he finally spoke, it felt like, rather than being creative or actively intelligent, it felt like he was remembering having been intelligent. It felt pat in a way.
Right.
But I thought that you played that really well. How did you land there, right? Am I right that he's kind of remembering intelligent things he once said,
Yeah.
rather than creating them in the moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of. I kind of viewed it as he kind of like hit a breaking point where he couldn't understand life any more than he did. So he was just going over the same things again and again, trying to figure out more, but he just could never like take one more step to like really understand what life was about. And I thought that's kind of what the play was about.
Okay. I think the whole kernel of the meaning of the play is in that, it's buried somewhere in Lucky's speech, and buried also, well, not really buried in Vladimir's. She has several monologues later in the second act, I think, that really speak to a lot about what the play could be about, okay, and why we're there, and why these people are there, and why, in general, we are here, okay. Anyway, let's see, what's next?
Are we moving on from gender?
Yeah, well, no, go ahead, you have
Can I ask
questions.
a question just
Yeah.
before we move on? I'm curious, I didn't see your play, I'm sorry that I missed it, but I listened to the actual
Mhm.
play elsewhere. I'm curious as to what these women think about how adding the role of gender to your enactment of this play perhaps shines light on current gender issues within our own society. Like, does the fact that Pazzo is a woman perhaps make us question our own identity as females and being in a submissive role in the 21st century? Like, if you were to put it in our time period, do you think that that you being able to play those characters is relevant for us? I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it this way, so when we did the production, I was Pazzo, Brian was Lucky. And so, in that instance, a normal 21st century view, there's not really anything wrong with that. Beckett wouldn't like it because I'm a female. But if we would have switched those roles and I would have been his servant, you would have had women that were like, dude, what the, that's not nice. Even though it had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that we are male and female, it would have just been that's how we got cast because that's the roles we were best suited for. And so I think that by pushing that boundary a little bit in a lot of different ways, like the fact that because of the questionable relationship between Vladimir and Estragon, whether they are gay or whether they are heterosexual, it pushes that even further because it's still two women. If we would have had a male and a female, then it wouldn't have been a question anymore. They would have had a heterosexual relationship. Whether they were in love would have then been the question. And so, by doing that, it pushes it a little bit more, and especially because Godot is this other entity that is controlling the entire situation between these two women, it brings up this whole, in some sense, it brings up the whole role that women in some ways still aren't in control. And you can agree with that or you can't, but it brings forth that other issue because it's a male that's dominating whether they get to leave or not. Mm-hmm. And then between Lucky and I, it's a woman that's dominating what he gets to do and what he doesn't. And so both roles are they shift, but both versions of it are represented in some sort of way. So you can kind of take from it what you will.
It's a nice juxtaposition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really interesting just in the fact, from an actor's perspective, why I was so adamant about what I said is because I thought I could give an authentic performance as a woman. But in addition, this was written for an all-male cast in a time when that was really acceptable. But still today, we still don't have I'm going to go on a geeky limb here, we still don't have a female-led Marvel superhero movie yet. We still don't have a lot of those equality things that we assume we do. And I had a couple of people who told me they were offended that I was playing Vladimir. Like friends of mine at other theater schools who saw that I put it on Facebook, which was probably against the rules. Sorry, everyone. But I had a couple people who told me, really? Like, who are you playing? Are you the stage manager? And I said, no, I'm playing Vladimir. And people didn't like it. People don't like that because it's not traditional. And these are 3 very powerful roles that were filled by women. And I think occasionally that makes people really uncomfortable. So.
I think that it's just, I keep asking myself why not? Like, why not play a male role? Why not a male play a female role? It doesn't seem like it should matter, because as long as you play the character and you fit the character right, then there shouldn't be a difference. I mean, as long as you can really, do your job right, then that should be all that matters. I mean, back in the day when Shakespeare didn't think women could act, men played all the female roles, and nobody had a problem with that. So why should anybody have a problem with us playing male roles?
Couple observations on this. I was talking with the person who came for the writer's series, and we had both seen the production at the New Globe of The Tempest, and Vanessa Redgrave played Prospero. And people were offended at that, but those of us who saw it didn't understand what the fuss was about. She's fine. I know that seems kind of obvious for me to say that, but she's fine. You forgot 5 minutes after it happened, it was Vanessa Redgrave, and then, you got on with the business of watching The Tempest. But the other thing that I wanted to say is, and I'm reaching back 40 years so I could have this wrong, but I think the book is, it's a book by Paul Fussell called The Great War in Modern Memory. And he talks about the incredible bonds that the men in the trenches in World War I formed with one another. And he used the term homoeroticism. In other words, it's not necessarily that they were engaging in sexual activity, which kind of clouds the issue a little bit. It's more that it was 2 men and 2 women formed a bond. They formed what he called a homoerotic bond, which there was a kind of love, and it didn't necessarily have to involve any physical manifestation of that. It was just a very tight bond. And so I guess you guys really pulled that off in the production, and I don't see that as necessarily running contrary to at least that part of Beckett's approach.
Well, I think that women can have those sorts of relationships too, not necessarily on the battlefield. I'm sure that can happen, but there are plenty of places, where women have those kind of relationships. Prostitution, it happens there.
Yes, it's the right book.
What's that?
I just looked it up. That's the right book.
Okay, thank you.
For those of you who don't know Becca Lubain, she just came in. She was the assistant director for the show. And she did a lot of work with Brian and was, along with him, responsible for the whole way Lucky kind of came out and that whole Lucky speech came out. So
Yeah, she deserves 1,000 handshakes.
This play is chock full of metaphors and all different kinds of things, and it's making statements on just about everything in society of the time. Okay, which I guess my question is, do those still apply today? 50, 60 years later, 70 years, how long has it been? I don't know. Paul, you would know, you were there.
No, but it was the year before I was here.
But there's a lot of stuff going on with the hats in the play, for instance. If they all have bowler hats, and why are the hats there? What do they represent? Okay, I think it's a pretty blatant attempt at saying the hats are about thought and about thinking, and what goes on in the brain. And a lot of Vladimir's always playing with her hat, and it's because her brains keep falling out. She's trying to find them, but that, and I think Ponzo would like to talk a lot about art and society and how they work together or not work, or does art have any meaning anymore? The world's gone to hell. So, and Dee and Godot, I think, represent the lost souls of humanity in a way, perhaps. But I don't know, those of you who saw, yeah.
Sorry, going back to the hats thing. One thing that really kind of caught my attention during the after talk, or I don't know exactly what it's called, but you, Lily, catch your name. You said that you thought Vladimir was playing with her hat because she was I can't remember what I was gonna say.
Okay.
But,
You need your
I
hat.
remember what I said.
my whole point is, it bothers me that only Vladimir, whether or not she's the only one that remembers each day, that only she's playing with the hat. And, cause I feel like that should be reversed. Since Vladimir is the one that remembers, the hat should stay on at all times because she remembers.
Well, and see, that's the thing, and I struggle with that same thing, I'll be honest with you. But I think what I said at the talk back, I still think is true, and it's that Estragon pretty consistently wears the hat, forgets pretty much everything, doesn't remember the day before. Whereas I was always messing with my hat, and I started to think of that as if the hat got left on, all my memories would just be gone as well. And so when she's messing with the hat, it's like she's trying to make herself remember, this is what happened today. This is what's happening right now. It's like the forgetfulness keeps creeping in, so she keeps checking her hat to make sure all her thoughts are still there.
So could you think that the hats don't represent thought, but they represent anti-thought?
I mean, it's a complicated theory, but yeah, I think that, I read a quote from Beckett that said, like, the bowlers, one of his ideas about the bowlers is that they represented, like, education and, like, higher status, or at least intelligence. And so, you know, I think he just wanted every character in the play to be taken seriously on some level, especially Lucky, who I think is the most important character. That's my theory. So.
Because they're all bums, but they're all very educated. As you can see that I quote poetry, like I quote a poem by Mary Shelley. You quote several things.
Shakespeare, okay.
Yeah, all those things. So he just wanted to probably, at least I think, if that's what you're going on.
Yeah.
Just, you know, tell, even though they're dressed like bums and they're really dirty and they're out and they don't remember anything, then they still are educated and they're not just stupid.
Going off, sorry, maybe changing the subject a bit. The whole educated thing. If I noticed that too, is they sense some inkling of previous education that they can only recall every now and then, which in my opinion kind of supports the purgatory theory, because they're just remembering things from their past life that they learned, and the reason why they're bums is because that's how they're paying for their lives, or for the bad things they get.
Could be.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. There are a lot of questions. You know, one of the questions that came up was, is Vladimir really the only one that's there? And everyone else is a figment of Vladimir's imagination. So, you know, that's been put forward for many years. But other questions or anything regarding that?
Well, can I pick Lost Souls for 500?
Yeah.
Daily level.
You know, it really that really strikes me. You know, it's compelling. When I remember a couple years ago, I heard a report about survivor's guilt, and you know, and Holocaust survivors who are now at the age of entering retirement homes and facing dementia. So there's a lot of the experience in that retirement home of like when they're being brought to the cafeteria, it all comes back to concentration camp, and there's like. Basically, the person who was analyzing this was talking about like they still don't understand why they survived, right? So they don't feel fully alive like ghosts, and so the Lost Souls thing in terms of the World War II context you were talking about that speaks to me, and I wanted to ask about the play and how you wrestled with Beckett's approach to the Lost Soul component. The opening line is nothing to be done, right? And then said, I don't know, 3 more times in the first act or something. But then there's like a decline with kind of an embrace at the end. And you talk about hope in the program.
Right.
Where do you think he lands in terms of Lost Souls by the end of the play?
It's hard to say because I think you could look at it in different ways. You know, the tack that we tried to take, and I'm not sure if we were very successful or necessarily, that there was hope left, and that whatever had happened in their past, whatever brought them there to that situation, as far as they can remember, I don't know whether it was bad or good or what's going on, but that there's always some hope for the next day, and that Godot will eventually come. So, I don't know.
Or is the hope in giving up on him coming
Yeah, I mean,
and
that's
then
the other
returning the
thing.
agency instead of being a lost soul hoping
Right.
for something else. And what do you all think? Where did sort of, how did you interpret hope into the way you played characters, if at all?
The hope just in the rope.
In terms of hope, I'm John, I'm the boy. I was talking with Kayla about also the whole purgatory or limbo thing from Dante's Inferno, that Godot in a way represents our understanding of God or the second coming, in that we keep putting this hope that one day God will come, or one day maybe we'll all live in peace or harmony or something. But I think in terms of hope, the critique is we keep waiting for it to come, when in actuality we create our hope.
It reminds me of your work with technology, Anthony. Like, are we relinquishing our agency and placing it on Godot, or on technology, or on Second Coming, or instead of taking responsibility for our choices, which almost happens at the end, or no?
I mean, there are things that happen that I think spark, especially in our version, there's the flower and the ribbon, which we saw as symbols of hope. And those just kind of appeared, that wasn't anything we did. And then the leaves that appear, that's nothing we did either. So I think that we did create a lot of our own hope, or at least I think Dee Dee did, hoping she's not crazy. But in addition, there were outside sources that were influencing whether we had hope or not. So that's a hard question. Anyone else has any ideas?
Going off the hope thing, could you use the color red for hope, correct? Well, one of the
Well, let me just say that the color to me wasn't really important.
okay.
It turned out to be red because that's just the way that it worked out. The original impetus behind that had nothing to do, in my mind, had nothing to do with hope. I just wanted to give them, these women dressed in all black, grungy clothing, a little bit of femininity.
Got it.
That's really all that I was looking at.
Alright, well, I was in one of the lines, I think in the first act, Vladimir refers to like a vineyard or something like that. And but in the second act, when she tries to refer to it again, she can't remember every detail. And I feel like that's as you said, that's the giving up hope on for Godot to come, because you're not trying to keep those happy memories anymore, and you're just letting time go by.
I'm not sure they're happy memories. We definitely say they're dead and gone at one point, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard. We definitely, I associated when I realized I had a line about things being red, started grabbing at the red ribbon in Bella's hair because I thought it was funny. And then it became the connection, and I really liked it. But yeah, I think there's definitely a vineyard. I'm not sure that it was a happy time. Go-Go almost drowned. So
Yeah, the happy memory that I talk about in the show is me trying to kill myself and failing.
Yes, I don't know.
So yeah.
It was a hopeful place in that maybe there was more color and less dirt, but I don't know about happy. I don't know. It's so hard. It's so vague.
My happiness in my character is in ignorance, because I just keep forgetting, and when I forget, my mind goes to something else. Like, I forget that I'm waiting for Godot. I forget the fact that my foot is hurting.
What if you actually did drown and Vladimir died trying to save you?
Probably.
Your hope does increase in the moment you forget Godot, and then you remind
Yeah,
her.
whenever she reminds me that he's coming, I'm like, oh no! I'm like, that's right!
Why?
Yeah, but my hope is just in the fact that, I don't know, maybe if Godot comes, it'll be a little bit better than it is right now.
There might be something better in there.
In my interpretation of those moments before you remind her is that you're coming back to having choices.
Yeah.
And then, nope, we're waiting for this thing.
I'm happy, I'm like, let's go, we can do something else,
Yeah.
and then she just shackles me back down. Nope, gotta wait.
So who's the real one?
It's true.
Who knows?
Lucky. Still lucky.
Lucky's lucky.
Yeah,
It's
right.
real.
So regarding progression, one of the things that I think was kind of foremost on my mind as we went through the play, and with women and everything, and knowing Beckett's opinion of the place of women in the play, does the universality of the play itself kind of undermine his whole opinion of what's going on? and that is to say, it works out, 60 years later, it works out with these characters as being women, okay? Does that undermine his original intent? Or if Beckett were still alive today, would he go, oh, well, that does kind of work, Maybe it's not such a big deal.
He is. I feel like Samuel Beckett is just such an ironic dude. Like, he writes these plays, and he doesn't give up what they're about. And he's like, oh, they can be interpreted by whatever you want to interpret it. And then he says, oh, but no women. So he's like, so you can do whatever you want except that.
It's not only no women, it's no change.
No change at all.
No
Like,
change, yeah.
I thought the play was really long and that it would take me forever to get through it. But really, the reason it was really long is because he had these lines of specific directions that I've never seen in any play that I've been in, of specific stage directions, specifics of where each character should move, how they should do. Like, there was an entire page of the scene where we exchange hats, because he's like, Vladimir passes this, Vladimir does this, Estragon does this, and it was a really simple thing. It lasted like 10 seconds. But he's just really specific on some points, but also really like open for others. It's strange to think about what Beckett would say, because I mean, you just never know. Just roll the dice.
Is there some common thread to where he's specific that you found?
Where he's specific?
Yeah.
Just in, well, definitely like dealing with Vladimir's hat. Whenever she takes it off, that is in the script. I know that much. Whenever I take off my boot and I look in it, that is in the script.
Why?
No idea. I mean, just specific things. Like, he had an idea, maybe, of what he wanted it to be. And he never told anyone.
Why that?
Why the boot? Why the hat?
Why did he want it to be that?
I don't
Big,
know.
because he had a specific idea. If
What was that idea?
I don't know.
You did the play. I'm just curious
No.
what your interpretation of the idea is. What's his thesis? If he's very specific about these particular interpretations of taking the hat off and putting the hat back on and all that exchange and the boot and looking into the boot and the boot being tight and the boot being loose and all those things that he talks about in play, is there some thesis that you can derive from all of those specific things? Since you have an intimate knowledge. I mean, I know what I think it is, but I'm curious what you think it is.
Just why there were specific things that seemed really small.
How all those small things build to some specific thesis regarding the entire play.
I mean, it could be that first line. It could be nothing to be done. Honestly, like, that's probably the best line to sum that up, because there are plenty of insights in Vladimir's monologues and Lucky's monologue, even just in the boys' short time on stage, that you could say sum up the show. But the best one is that nothing to be done. These characters can't move, they don't move, they won't move, whatever it is. Nothing can be done about it. We don't leave the stage, ever, except to pee.
And they're often thwarted in their efforts, I think. Trying to hang themselves and the road breaks, and things like that. I mean, it's hard to say. I think a lot of it has to do with, very simply, just with he didn't want to allow artistic license for anyone else. That it was his creation, and that's the way it had to be done. And there are a lot of playwrights that are that way. Yeah, Sam Shepard is one, for example. So,
But, it could be nothing more than the fact, too, I mean, I hate to trivialize this, but it could be nothing more, this was the first dramatic work he did. He'd been a novelist up to this point. Novelists have a lot more control over their material than playwrights do. And so it could be something that simple.
right. I remember reading an article about Roger Blin, who was the original director of the show and the original Pazzo, because the actor who was playing Pazzo quit, so he took over. It's couldn't find anyone else. But even he said, as he was directing the play, he didn't really know what it was about. He didn't know, and whenever he would ask Beckett, Beckett would never give him an answer that was useful.
Yeah, you still did it.
But, and maybe Beckett, maybe he didn't know what it was about. It's hard to say, but I'm sure he did.
The only reason that I can come up with for that is because I keep trying to have some specific answer, but I don't, as much as because this play has so many directions it can go in, there has to be something that can tie it together, something that doesn't have like a huge weight. Like, so you can still be really flexible, but there's still these one things, like there has to be the bowler hats, there has to be the suits, the shoes, that can tie together every production.
I think also the play, the whole leaving it ambiguous goes back to, yes, the whole thing with nothing to be done. Because also around this time you have deconstruction going around. Whereas before everybody else thought that there was an inherent meaning within everything, within a word, within a work, and there's always this draw to go back to the meaning of what the author actually meant. But really, after deconstruction and post-structuralism, that's just impossible to know, because even if the author did have a meaning, which he probably did, otherwise he probably wouldn't have written it, it doesn't really matter because we create our own meaning.
Well, one of my favorite Beckett quotes about this whole show is he's like, it will never cease to amaze me how people can overanalyze such a simple thing. Something to that effect. And clearly he didn't think it was that complicated, so I don't know.
Because going on that and what you were saying and how, things get deconstructed in the show and all of that kind of stuff, I would like to know, and especially from the actor's point of view, from sound and lighting and design and all of those kinds of areas. How do you move from, you're reading, so for the actors, you're reading on the page, or, when you're doing set design, or all the aspects that come together. You read these directions in the play, but then clearly, as you go, you're progressing into building these characters and drawing from it, or building the sets, or composing lighting, or putting the music in, the cues, all of those things. When you start, and then to that last bit, how does that process, I know that's a big question, but how does that process go? Like, is there a lot of interaction between each other when you do that? Or what are you building upon when you create these different aspects? Whoever wants to start.
That is a huge question.
I know, it's a big one.
I'll definitely say that there is an aspect of building on within one another, because with designing, you can read the play and think of something like this will be good, but then if you watch the actors act through the run through, and then you can just think this will be good too, and so you can see how they're moving and set up, and also go along with that and get new ideas from the actors rather than just reading it.
Yeah, I think it was important to go off of what the actors were doing, because it's their play. It's essentially what they thought was happening, and so it's important that we based all of our stuff on them and what they thought was going
on. I disagree. In the way that I approach it, the way that I direct, I'm a big believer in letting actors do their job. We spend a lot of time training them. So it's not my job to sit there and micromanage everything that they do necessarily. I equate it to, I do the big brush strokes and they do all the detail work. As far as designers and how it all works together, it's different for every show. And the way that we teach theater in the United States is that the director is in charge, and unless the playwright's involved. Then it's a whole different thing altogether. But the way that I think we approach it is, if Pat came to me and asked me a question, what would I say? I would just say, well, what do you think? I would give him what I'm seeing it all around, but if you want to make changes within that's fine, as long as it doesn't lead us in the wrong direction, Same thing with sound. I had definite ideas in my head as I was reading the play and thinking about it and all of this stuff. The music that kept coming back to me, I don't know if anyone knows who Brian Eno is, but all that ambient music, and then we kind of latched on. I hadn't really heard a lot of John Cage, but since John Cage was very important to Brian Eno, I kind of threw that out to him, and he kind of took the Brian Cage thing that's kind of where we came up with the Brian Cage in the show instead, or the John Cage. And so it's kind of, you know, in my opinion, I can give suggestions and let them also do their work and come back with whatever they can.
We essentially had a Samuel Beckett all of our own. Like, I mean, from like the very first audition, he handed me the Pozzo monologue, and she's explaining the Twilight, and I was like, so how obnoxious should I be? And he was like, oh, you know, just, you know, whatever you think. I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? And I essentially read it the same way I deliver it now, and I was just as obnoxious as I could muster. And I mean, you know, the whole time, because I was a woman that sat down on a stool and smoked a cigar or smoked a pipe, I was like, how like masculine should my movements be? And he's like, well, what do you think? I was like, well, I think that I'm a girl, but I don't think that a woman would walk around and sit on a stool and bust out a pipe. Like, I've never seen that happen before. And he was just like, oh, well, what do you think you should? I was like, oh my gosh. And so eventually you just, I mean, because he was just so vague, but it was freeing in a way, because that meant that every day that I went into rehearsal, I could sit down differently and pull it out of my pocket in a different way, and as long as you didn't yell at me, that I was good that day. You know?
I had several of them pretty worried, because my process is as we go through, you know, I give notes to what I think is important. If I don't give you notes, then you're, in my opinion, you're doing good work, okay? And the whole goal is to get to by the time we're opening the show, you don't get any notes at all, okay? So, some of them, especially Bella, was worried.
It was pretty much just me. I just brought it up. I was like, has he given up on me?
But it's interesting because, I mean, Beckett really didn't, outside of saying there's a tree and a road, I think that's all it says in the script. Didn't talk about lighting, except for the moon, that's it. Didn't talk about sound, okay? He didn't mention any of that stuff, so that's all that. I had vague notions of what I wanted, and then I kind of let them know, and they ran with it. So.
Did anything come up that was completely unexpected, like within the characters themselves, or anything like that?
Definitely. All the time we would do certain things during practice, just like throwing it out, like, I feel like doing this, and Scott would go, you keep that. A lot of times, like, anyone that saw the play, like, when I did the tree, and I was, like, actually mimicking the tree, that was just something I was doing for a laugh, and he ended up, he's like, yes, keep that. So, there are certain things that happen. It's my favorite thing about theater, is just, you do it one day, and it just sticks. And it's just something about the character you learn every single day that you do it again. It's a great learning experience, and it's fantastic.
When I first read the show, I was like, what the hell is this? What am I doing? And because I tried to read it before, and I guess this is just along the line of like building a character and building the show as it went along, but then I started getting into rehearsals with Bella, and I was like, this is really fun. I am literally listening to the sound of my own voice and bouncing off of Bella, and she falls asleep. This is amazing.
Happens in real life too.
And there were definitely some moments, you know, and it's just so hard to separate this from me for the show, of where I was like, I am acting this part too masculine, like Brittany was saying, like, I am acting this masculine, and I'd be like, well, what am I considering masculine? The fact that I keep talking, the fact that I have problems peeing, either those are masculine problems. Girls talk all the time, and I just eventually kind of came around to the conclusion that, another nerdy breakthrough, I'm sorry, it's my life. If any of you have seen Battlestar Galactica, probably none of you, one of you, the main character, one of the main characters is a woman who acts like a man and smokes cigars like a man and does everything like a man, except she's a girl and there's no change. She's just a girl doing these things. And so it came a lot easier, and then I realized I'm just Vladimir, Dee Dee, with Go-Go, talking about everything. And so it really grew, and it grew with everyone from the whole start and just kind of steamrolled on.
I definitely agree that, like, because we didn't rehearse I think we like did a read through, and then he gave us a script over break, and he was like, okay, go through it. And I was going through it, and it was all right, and I knew my character, but the moment we started rehearsing together as a team, as a unit, just really you bounce off each other, you've got great chemistry, and so many more ideas come out from being with other people. It's great.
When Brian started actually yelling at us, I screamed. Anytime you heard me scream in the play, it was my real, like, squeak of terror.
That was real.
I was like, what is he going to too. It's like a horror movie.
Well, I think that shows how, not necessarily how the plays changed, but how we changed as a society. And the whole gender equality thing is it really, we view it, and by the time we saw it, it doesn't really matter whether they're male or female. They're good characters. And that's what he wrote, were good characters and good language. And so in the end, it really, those kinds of things that didn't matter. And I think that says a lot about how, hopefully, how society's changed in the last 60 years. So.
But did they matter? Because they had to think about them. They had to question what was being done masculine and what was being... You added red because it was feminine.
Right.
So maybe it did matter more than we give it credit for mattering. It mattered.
Well, it
more
matters
subtly.
through the lens of 1953, I think. If you can do that lens. But, yeah, John.
Just 3 quick thoughts. One is Nerdy Breakthrough is a great band name if you like to play an instrument.
Thank you.
2 is thinking about your I'll just speak to 2. I'm thinking about your question about relevancy today. I think, obviously in terms of gender, thinking about one of the things having 2 female leads did was kind of show that gender itself is a performance. Right. I thought that was really effective to play on this play in that way. But what struck me the most about relevancy today, and it disturbed me, was that 1953 compared to World War II is the same distance as today compared to the beginning of the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm sorry, I don't want to speak for every human being, but I don't sense that we feel like we're lost souls in the same way. Our warfare is through drones now. We weren't allowed to see the caskets from people coming home from war. There's not a draft, right? Our economy just continued kind of rolling for a while, at least in the recession, but people kept going with their debt. We didn't change our lives, we didn't make sacrifices. It's not as deep in our consciousness as, and so it actually kind of disturbed me that in Beckett's time period, he was taking very seriously the impact of the war on human existence. And we may agree or disagree on the war itself as a policy, but we don't wrestle with its impact on our existence in the same way. And it almost troubled me that we're not as troubled as him. Does that make sense?
It is troubling, which is why that's up there. War has changed since 1945,
And it's been kept external.
It's
external.
We don't even, we don't hardly even know what's going on.
That's right.
We're still fighting.
Depending on the family you're from and the class you're from, but it's less universal.
Well, external to who? Certainly isn't external to the Iraqis.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree with you. Or families that have a lot of.
I'm not putting you, but I'm just saying that that's an American perspective that the war is external.
Well, it is an American perspective, and it's important to realize that this is a European play. After World War II, Europe was flattened, and what was the major form of theater in the United States? The musical. Okay, so we're all happy-go-lucky, even though we're not. We're really not, because a lot of Americans died in the war, and a lot of them came back in horrible shape. But in Europe, there was nothing left.
And there was something that said this play was very much inspired by the battered European countryside, that this was kind of how Beckett saw it. And in America, we haven't had, since the Civil War, a war on our own soil like that at all. And so that is pretty distanced from us, not from other people, like Paul pointed out, but we don't have the same kind of idea of our land as a wasteland. So.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Estragon or Vladimir actually make a reference in a line to the war that in the play somewhere?
Not specifically. They say back to back like in the good old days. I took that to be a lot of different things.
Back to back like in the good old days. There was a part where I talk about a lot of people dying, but that could be considered for anything.
Yeah. It could be.
And Beckett fought in World War II. He was in the military.
There was one point that I thought, because Estragon wakes from a dream, maybe night terrors or something from war could have been possible. I considered that, maybe post-traumatic stress from something similar.
Yes, sir.
I've got to ask a philosophy question. Is that all right in the philosophy section?
Yes.
So, because I've actually been thinking of this the whole time, I was reading up on this because it's been a while since waiting for Godot in my life. So, you've got this thing called the myth of Sisyphus. that Camus developed, I believe, and it's the idea that in the emptiness we adopt repetitive patterns, and if we sometimes adopting repetitive patterns is okay, because it's the whole idea of Sisyphus rolling the stone up the hill every day, and wakes up the next morning and the stone is back down at the bottom of the hill.
Mhm.
But that for some, that's fine, because it gives them something. It gives people something to look forward to when they wake up in the morning. They know what it is that they're supposed to do. They've accomplished something at the end of the day, and it almost doesn't matter that it's the same thing the next day, because it at least fills their time. Now that's an oversimplification of what we're talking about, but that idea of it's kind of that myth of Sisyphus is where you first see that term applied, absurdism.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not asking did you talk extensively about Camus, because I can't believe you would do that. But did you talk about the repetitiveness and the which I thought was so interesting in the theme of progression, because progress could be perceived as just waking up and doing variations of the same thing day after day after day.
Right.
Did you guys talk about that at all? I mean, it sort of hooks in with this whole idea of destruction,
Yeah, I don't know that we spent a whole lot of time talking about it. Did you guys talk that amongst yourselves about it? Or?
Yeah, a little bit. And I think it just kind of follows through. Like the first act and the second act are just mirrors of each other in a lot of ways. Yeah, and so it kind of naturally falls in. But
Well, if you think about it, that rolling set stone up the hill every day becomes easier every day, and it becomes a task that you can do it as a menial task eventually, which to them, waiting for Godot becomes menial because they start to fully accept waiting for him, and by the end of the second act, they're like, okay, cool, let's just wait. So.
I don't think they just wait though.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing with, doing one thing every day becomes a menial task. Yes, it does, but usually if you set like a certain criteria for yourself that day, if you get this done at 2, if you get this done by noon, then you have time to do this, and then if you fulfill like small goals all the time, then you can make the whole thing menial. That's what I think. That's why the acts are different, but also at the same time a little repetitive, because they're like, let's curse each other. Now let's engage in conversation.
Right.
I've often compared it, at least when I used to talk about it and wonder what it was, I often compared it to Groundhog's Day. And if me and Vladimir are pretty much both Bill Murray in the situation, that it's the same thing is going to happen every day, but there will be different variations of what's happening because we are making those kind of changes. We're saying, okay, let's do this, and okay, let's do this. It won't be exactly the same, but it will still be this constant loop of being stuck in the same situation.
There's a commentator, I'm not saying I agree with the commentator, but there's a commentator on Beckett that says that perhaps Godot has already come and gone and they forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've heard that.
That Godot came and they didn't recognize.
Or that he's the boy and he's been there all along.
Long, yeah.
I would disagree with him too, because like if he came, then there'd be no reason for the boy to come.
Right.
Other than that, but we did talk about how if the boy is Godot, then that's kind of funny because Godot's just this psychopath that likes to dress up like a boy and make Yes. But I also thought originally also a lot of people cast 2 boys instead of just 1, and knowing that, I also kind of played them a little differently in each act. There's a reference to the first boy tending the goats and his brother tending the sheep. And immediately I thought of Jesus' metaphor of one with the sheep and the goats. And so I thought that they could totally be 2 different boys. One comes in and deceives them and says, Godot's actually not coming. And then the one in the last act can't really do anything other than that what Vladimir assumes. He doesn't actually say Godot isn't coming, he just affirms what she's already thought in her head.
So with that, why Godot, not Godot?
But why did we approach it that way? For when people ask. I mean, that's always one of the big questions. How are you going to pronounce it? It'd be Godot, 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 Godot. I had heard someone talking, I can't remember who, the French pronunciation of the name is Godot. And I didn't necessarily want to get caught up in the whole idea that, he's Godot God or anything like that. It's a French name of a guy named Godot. So that's where I got it from.
One thing, I had some little realization. So, yeah. When you were talking about the little intricate steps to develop the characters, and Bella was talking about how complicated the stage directions are, it reminded me of one of my favorite writing tips out there is the reason why authors torture their main characters, and the reason why they put them through such strife is to break them. Because you only truly know what a character is made of is if the author breaks them first.
I would agree with that. I mean, in my DD, absolutely, because you see the giant existential monologue of "Am I sleeping?" and then in the end, my DD picked up the flower and took Astragon's hand, and left with, hopefully broke the pattern. That's what I think happened there. Maybe they're not stuck anymore, but I don't know.
Traditional staging is at the end, they just stand there. Go anywhere. I almost played with the idea, well, maybe we'll just start them walking off and then we'll go to black instead of, but I don't know. I figured we screwed around with it enough. But who knows? I guess about this particular thing, one of my questions is, how good would Godot go over in right now in Afghanistan or Iraq? Because they're in that situation that Europe was in a long time ago, being destroyed and having all these people come through.
I feel like with the right setting, the right build up, like if you were to just go into Iraq or Afghanistan, and you were to just start the play right then and there, they would not take kindly to it at all. You would have to, it would definitely have to be a diplomatic approach and like a very slow build up to actually airing the play in the country.
Yeah.
Well, I told you, Scott, at the end of the matinee that the show Treme, which is about sort of the Ninth Ward in the years after Hurricane Katrina, and they're all kind of waiting for New Orleans to give them their neighborhoods back and build houses, and they show a scene. They show actually the scene where Lucky speaks, and the setting actually is out in the city, and they have it set up outside, and there's kind of bleachers for the crowd, but the destruction of the hurricanes behind them, and so that's an interesting setting.
Yeah.
And they're thinking about what we're really waiting for following a disaster. It's worth seeing if you haven't seen that. It was in the last season.
Waiting for it to get on Netflix. On Netflix.
Waiting for Netflix. HBO. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or?
Can I slip in real quick?
Yes.
So this production was produced part out of reverie for the play, and in another sense, it gave the author's wishes the finger, and to great effect. But I was wondering, I guess a question for the cast. At this point, the production has run. You put so much work into it. What is your relationship to Beckett? I mean, how do you view this artist?
It's a great way.
I'm upset with him.
I'm sorry?
I'm upset with him.
Okay.
After working on it for so long, it's so hard to have an understanding of it.
I'm not gonna lie, the play is really inspiring for me. Just because I like the whole absurdity genre, I like Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, I like different fantastical things coming together, and then people trying to make something out of nothing. I just watching the play, I came up with something different every single night, and I just really enjoy that ambiguity that I can fill in, because it gives me purpose to make it purposeful.
I have the opposite experience of that. I really, really struggled with this play at the beginning, seeing it every night, and I had a different meaning for it every night. And I finally came to terms with the fact that I think there are a bunch of meanings. I think it's just not one overarching, and that finally put me at peace. And so I kind of, I enjoyed it more, but I really did struggle for a while. Yeah.
As an artist and as a playwright, I have come to appreciate him. First, I didn't understand his work and what he was doing and what he was trying to say, but now I understand that that's not the point. It's supposed to be what you think of the play and what you want to do with the play. And I appreciate anyone who can write a play that you can just do anything with, because I like that idea.
That's why it's truly universal play, in my opinion. You know, it's like Oedipus the King or whatever. You can, sure, written 2,000 years ago, whatever, it still can apply today. You know, and I think this play will apply. Hopefully, if there's anyone around 2,000 years from now, to them. So.
Yeah, I respect Beckett a lot, and I understand I've written things, and I don't like to think about my baby writings being changed either, especially if they were my first successful playwriting piece. But I like to think that if he was born in September 1992, like I was, he would be totally open to what we did, because he seems like he had a decent sense of humor. Not telling anyone what your play is about for your entire life takes a lot of stamina, and I think if he had a more modern worldview, he would have been fine with what we did. It's just the fact that his estate is protecting what a man who wrote this in the 1950s thought. So can't blame that. I don't have to like it, but maybe new forward-thinking artists will change that. So.
I like Beckett. He's good, and I have a really big appreciation for what he did. And I think it's crazy that you can get so much out of something literally so simple. And I think it's very impressive for somebody to do that, especially in like the 21st century, because we live in a world that's just full of changing context all the time, and so we can interpret it in so many different ways. But it's just really impressive that someone that long ago was able to make a play that even 100 years from now, when the context is completely different, it'll still make meanings that matter. I just think that's very impressive. I just wish I could sit him down and explain to him that it doesn't matter what I have down there, even if it's a traffic cone, that I can play whatever the heck I want. You know, it shouldn't matter what gender we are, it shouldn't matter what sex we are. What matters is the message that's coming out from us. And I think that's something that, given a different context when he wrote the play, that he would be able to embrace.
I also think, just on a very simple level, it's also a very funny play. So, and he was a big fan of vaudeville actors and Buster Keaton and those guys, and I think that's where a lot of the humor comes from. So I hope we kind of tried to plumb some of those depths. But it's well enough written that it's just there. So.
Any questions? Comments? Thank you very much to the cast and crew and the Intersections will be back on April 14th with our visiting scholar, Dr. Allison Walker, with Ductus in the Digital Age. She'll be talking about progression of the sensory experience of writing through the ages, from stone tablets all the way up to your tablets. So, everyone, thank you again to everyone for coming. It was great.